All right, everybody, welcome to another developer interview here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. It is time for another Perceptive podcast. And my guest is a returning developer, and we have spoken a whole lot about adventure games. They are currently working on the upcoming title Old Skies, and he's here to catch up, talk adventure games, and more. So, please welcome from Wadjet Dave Gilbert. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm good, thank you.
It is great to have you back on. We were just trying to reminisce before we start about when's the last time we actually spoke. It seems like it's been a long time.
I remember talking like before Unavowed launched. I don't know if we talked after that. It has been a while though, I know that.
I know we did the roundtable, the other adventure game developers. That was a lot of fun.
Right, that's right. Okay, yeah.
And I'm trying to get some more of those roundtables set up or do some more like adventure game stuff. So we'll chat about that like after the stream to see what we can do logistics wise. But it is great to have you. I know I'm catching you just before you're going on vacation. So
Yes.
again, a happy early vacation here.
Thank you. It's been a very busy couple of months, so I'm glad to not have to think about it for a little while. Even though part of when I'm away, it coincides with a game conference in Brighton.
Mhm.
And since I'm going to be in the UK anyway, I'm just going to go, which so it's like kind of work related. It seems weird to be on vacation and then go to a industry conference, but a lot of my friends are going to be there. So I'm looking forward to seeing them because I haven't seen them in a long time because of
Yeah.
everything.
Oh, yes. So, we certainly have a lot to catch up about. As I said in the little stinger, of course, you have an upcoming game, Old Skies, which I tried to
Yes.
demo out during Next Fest. I'm sure a whole lot of other people did as well.
I
So,
saw that. Thank you.
so of course, with all these kinds of cats, since you've been a regular here, we don't really, I think, need to do too much in terms of brief introductions. So, I guess for people watching us live or recorded, how is everything going on with Wadjet Eye since we last spoke?
For the four people watching or four people watching. Sorry. Things are going good. It's been, like slower than I'd like. Because the pandemic just slowed everything to a crawl for a while. 2020 and like the first half of 2021 was just like I basically got nothing done. It was pretty bad. But we're back on track. We've published. Did manage to publish one game called Strangeland, which came out last year. We are publishing another game, which I haven't announced yet. I've been talking about how I'm publishing something else. There is a very weird logistical reason why I haven't announced what it is yet, but that should be coming out in a few months. So we're very excited about that. I'm in the middle of processing and editing the voiceover right now. So that's cool. And still publishing Nighthawks. That's by Richard Cobbett. And of course, there's the game I'm writing, Old Skies, which we released a demo of for Next Fest. And so that's been that's kind of taken a back seat while I work on this unannounced game. So yeah, there's a lot going on, which is good because for a while, especially during the pandemic, there was nothing going on, and
Mhm.
I was kind of getting a little worried that I'd be able to maintain things, but things are
Mhm.
going well, so I'm happy.
How has it been doing like publishing as well as design? Like, I guess like how has like your workflow? How have things like changed in terms of like your own thoughts doing like publishing other adventure games?
That's interesting. That's interesting. I kind of I'm a lot more hands off than I used to be, to a degree. I used to be really heavily involved with the production, like almost from start to finish. Now I'm a little less so. I because I my primary focus is on my own stuff, and so if someone has a great game and they need help with it, or I like it, and there's something I can offer, um, and I do take it on, I will, I'll do all the things I usually do, but I'm not as like heavily involved in production as I used to be. So there's that. Like Strangeland, I only came in like towards the end.
Mhm.
Nighthawks, I'm only involved. My company is involved. Like Ben Chandler is doing the artwork and stuff, but I personally am not. And this other game, this Untitled game, the British game, I'll call it, because I did announce that I was doing I was doing a casting call for a game with an all British cast, so I can safely call it the British game. Um, that I kind of came in about a year ago. I played a build. I made a few, you know, just quality of life suggestions, which they did. But mostly my involvement has been, getting the voice acting done, getting it tested, and all of that stuff. So my thoughts on it haven't changed very much. Uh, there was never a rhyme or reason to why I published anything before, and there still isn't. It's just, do I like it? Yeah, okay, sure, I'll take it on. Um, and that's basically it.
And I guess, like, from your perspective, with like kind of the adventure games we've been seeing lately, I guess, has there been any like new trends, or have developers like gone in like a different direction since we last spoke in terms of the adventure genre?
I I'm never quite sure how to answer this question because um, it's I always compare it to someone asking, well, how have movies changed in the last year or two? Like, there's so many.
Mhm.
If anything, there's more adventure games now than like there have been in the last than they were a decade ago for sure. There's just so many of them.
Mhm.
The only thing that's different is that there's a lot more of them to play. And there's no particular trend because everyone making them wants to do something different. So the only difference is that there are more of them, and I'm glad about that.
Mhm. And we just had the announcement that the other Gilbert, Ron Gilbert, of course, is working on the new Tales of Monkey Island, or just the Adventures of Monkey Island. And that one is looking interesting. I know, unfortunately, he got a lot of flack about the art style, and that was a very
Yeah.
weird thing to be reading about this past week.
I have more empathy and sympathy for him than a lot of others would.
Hmm.
I guess because every time we release a new game that makes things slightly different, suddenly, I get complaints about the art style. I know with Old Skies, the fact that it's high res and not pixel art, and there's no talking portraits this time around. People complained about that. When we were
Hmm.
thinking of going 3D, people complained about that. And it's, the Nighthawks is a visual novel. People complain about that. And even with all that, my entire career, the amount of like negative, abusive comments I got is like a sliver of what Ron Gilbert just got in the last few weeks alone.
Hmm.
And I saw this and I'm like, oh God, like I wouldn't be surprised if he disengages entirely, which is what he did, because that's what
Hmm.
I would do.
Yeah.
And people say, oh, you should have a thick skin. But that doesn't mean like impenetrable.
Yep.
It's like when it just keeps coming and doesn't stop. You got to take care of yourself. You got to take steps to like minimize, you know, how it affects you. Because
Hmm.
especially when you're the face of a product like that, and you're on the front lines, you can't, you can't be protected by like a PR person or a social media, community manager or something like that. It's you, and you're
Hmm.
trying to work on this game, which, by the time you get to this point in any project, you your sanity is very fragile, and you're frazzled. You love and hate the game. There's all sorts of thoughts and worries, and it's stressful. Launching a game is stressful,
Hmm.
and someone comes along saying, hey, I have some criticism. I think you should change this, or I don't like this. Even if it's well meaning, it's not welcome. It just
Yeah.
isn't. And so, like, I don't care how well meaning you are. Like, I personally, like, am not going to respond to it. And if it just keeps coming, if I just would get like 100 response, like, I mean, he got so many,
Yeah.
and it just did not stop. And like, that's what I would do. I would disengage as well, especially if it was on my own website. Forget it. Like, disable comments. Bye. You're not acting in good faith. Neither will I. So I don't blame him one bit. I don't blame him one bit.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of those very annoying things to see. Especially, I know we did our roundtable about the adventure game genre, like kind of overall. We were talking about how there's always that kind of push and pull between trying to innovate or move in a different direction while keeping to and appealing to the adventure game fan base. And it's that challenge, I think, that's kind of, I don't know if any other genre, at least right now, kind of has that same kind of like push and pull. Like platformers have been around for over 40 years now, but people don't really care if you use pixel art or 3D art or 2.5D. And
I have never once. So I'm sorry. Finish with what you were going to say.
I was just going to say, like, it seems like the adventure genre, like with that same kind of age, it does have like this issue of how we move, but we can't move too far, and where can we go, kind of thing.
I handle that by not handling it. I just it's impossible because the there's no, like I said before, there's no one right way to make an adventure game. And if you are just trying to appeal to like the Sierra fans or the LucasArts fans, or like you're trying to make a game like Gabriel Knight and appealing to those fans, they don't know what they want. And so they think they do, but they don't. No one knows what they want. And it's not just adventure game fans. Like no one knows exactly what they want. The worst thing you can do is give people exactly what they say they want, because that it's just you want to try to give them what they don't realize they want, or what they didn't know they wanted, or something like that. I always think that if you're trying to, there is like an echo chamber of like the hardcore adventure game fans, and they are very vocal, but they're quite small, but also the opinions vary so much. There is no one right way to do any game. And the only thing any of us can do is make a game that pleases ourselves first and foremost. And so that's what I always try to do. I'm like, do I like this? Is this something I would play? Like if I saw this on a movie poster or a book jacket, like would I want to read it or see this movie or whatever? And if it's something I like, then that's all that matters. Because if I like it, someone else will probably like it too. So, and that's all I can do, because you can't please everybody. And so you just got to work on pleasing yourself. And fortunately, my instincts have been right more than wrong. So not every good idea is a good seller or a marketable one. You just never know. I mean, if we did know, then we'd all be millionaires. But that's just it. There's no way. There's huge companies with millions of dollars to spend on market research, and they get it wrong. I don't have a prayer, so I'm just going to make what I like, and it seems to have served me well so far.
And I just realized that YouTube was being very slow and didn't actually turn the stream on. That is great. Thank you, YouTube.
We can start over if you want. Now that I've gotten now that I can answer it even better this time, if you want.
Yeah, that may be good, because oh my goodness, I hate that YouTube has this damn delay when I hit the button and it says, "Hey, you can start now." I hit it, and then never decides to do it.
Are we live now?
We are live now, but I've been recording it, so everything will be saved for the recording.
Okay, so you are recording it.
Yeah. Always have that backup. That's the number one rule, right, when it comes to doing stuff online.
I don't mind answering those questions again. We weren't talking for too long.
Okay. Yeah, that may be alright, just for people tuning in. I mean, we do have the extra time. We did start a little bit earlier, so that's fine. So, for people, now that people are tuning in, welcome to the stream for our Dave Gilbert interview. So,
hi, for real this time.
Yeah. So, we're going to be having a chat about Old Skies as well as the adventure game genre. And if you have any questions for Dave, feel free to post them. Now that the stream is actually live, and people can watch, hopefully. So, let me just make sure that everything is good here. But now that we are going,
now that we're warmed up,
let's we didn't really get too far into our discussion, so let's talk a little bit more about the point about kind of like the trying to like pick and choose like where to go, like as you said, like follow your gut with your adventure game design. Because this was something that I was just thinking about again with a lot of the genres that we've played. And again, I'm just coming off of Next Fest, so I've played, I don't know, like 70, 80 games in the span of a week.
Apparently, there were like over 1,000 this year, which is just blows my mind.
Yes, it is. And part of the issue that I think with a lot of these games is that it's hard to know where you want to go with it. As in, okay, I want to make a platformer, or I want to make an adventure game, or a first person shooter. Now what do I do? Because
you've asked a question that like has just pierced me to the soul because I had a lot of trouble with Old Skies. If you follow the development on Twitter and just sort of my chats about it, like it was hard to get it to where it is now. It started off as a 3D game. We decided not to do that, and then I and then I decided, okay, well, the time travel idea is too difficult to do in 2D, so I'm going to try to do like an unavowed sequel because people seem to want that. And I tried, but there was nothing coming. Like I was just doing it because I thought there was a demand for it, not because I had a stellar idea. And then I just looked back at Old Skies and I'm like, I really like this idea, but it would just be, it's just the scope of at least the work involved in doing a time travel game where the character, you had a whole bunch of characters in different eras, and you have to the main character would change clothes a lot, and you have to redo all the animations, something that 3D is really good for. You have the same animations, you put different clothes on them, and then it all carries over. But in 2D that was difficult, and so I looked at it. I thought, well, this is where my muse seems to be taking me, so I'm going to do it anyway. And then I thought I had a good design. Then the pandemic hit, and then I found it so hard to work on it. I started hating everything about it. But, it's my livelihood, so I had to kind of push forward. I'm like, well, what else am I going to do? Not make a game? I can't do that. I got to support my family on this stuff. So I just kept pushing forward and hating every minute of it. Although in my head, I'm like, well, it's pandemic. I hate everything. So it's probably fine. And then like 8 months later, I just looked at what I had made and I hated it. Like the story and the plot, the backstory was just too epic and too complex. There was no real, like, I didn't really feel connected to it in the way that I did with my other games. And like I had decided I wanted to make a time travel story, but like you said, where do I go from here? And I do think that whenever you do have that thought of, oh, I want to make X or I want to do this, there is a reason why you are drawn to make that specific thing. You might not know what it is, and that is the danger. Where I decided I wanted to make a time travel story, but I didn't really think about what was drawing me to make a time travel story. So I was making a very bad time travel story. And then I sat down and thought about what is it that I like about this idea. And it basically started off, the plot of the original Old Skies was that that Thea works for this agency, takes tourists into the past, kind of like what was in the demo. But at the end of that, her first mission, something goes wrong. She comes back home and like basically everything is gone. It's just like her office and then like nothing. And so she still has her time travel gear. So she needs to try to go back in history and try to figure out what happened, what caused all this to happen. And that was the original story. And where I got stuck, I did the first mission where you take this tourist into the past and you help him out with something. Basically, a larger version of the demo that you played. And but that at that point, that's where I got stuck. I wasn't able to progress farther than that. I'm like, where do I go from here? Like I kind of know roughly what the story is, but I was just completely stuck. And then it sort of hit me that, well, why was I able to make this bit, but nothing else? And I realized it must be because this is the part of the story that I like.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this time travel tour guide taking someone into the past for various reasons. I was able to write that. I was able to program it. I was able to get it all into the game. But then after that, I was just like, ugh, I was just at sea.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was sort of the epiphany moment. It took 8 months to reach this point, but it was like, maybe this should be the game. Maybe this is what the game is about. And then I just started dashing down ideas for other, potential missions or clients that you could, that I could wrap a story around. And it was like a dam broke. I was just able to like get it all out. And I came up with like some really good ideas that I'm very, very happy with. And, it's been about 1.5 years since then. And, I've just been, firing on all cylinders, and it's just been great. And I'm really grateful that I was able to get to that point. And I had to basically start the whole thing over, but I'm glad I did because it's so much better. And people really like the demo that I created, which sort of reinforces, okay, I made the right choice. This is good. That's always the case of like you decide what you want to do, and then where do you go from there is always the problem I'm facing. And so, yeah, when I say you asked that question, I'm like, oh God, do I have things to say? So I went off, and I kind of went off a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's a really good example, kind of like trying to find like where you want to go with that game. Because again, like you could have kept trying, bash, the square peg into the round hole, saying make it this, end of time, we have to save all of time and all that kind of story. But if it's not working for you, it's better, to make something that, that resonates with you, because if it's not resonating with you, most likely it's not going to resonate with a lot of people with your audience.
That's exactly it. And like I said, it was during the pandemic, and I thought, well, I don't like anything. I hate everything. Everything's terrible. And then like when Strangeland was pitched to me, and that was kind of like a bit of a saving grace, because I could focus on that for a few months and not have to think about Old Skies. And so when I was done, when Strangeland shipped and that was all done, I took Old Skies and I'm like, well, maybe I like it now. I'll check it out. And I played it. I still didn't like it. I gave it to some colleagues of mine whose opinion I trust and I knew would be straight with me. They didn't hate it, but they did say that this doesn't feel like something you would write. And I thought, well, yeah, I didn't feel like myself when I was writing it. Basically, the pandemic was terrible, and so I'm glad I got there, as I said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I could have just barreled ahead and hated working on it, and would have just hated working on it, and then it wouldn't have been that great. So it's a much better game now, so I'm happy.
Mm-hmm. And returning to our point about we were talking about the Monkey Island game and Ron Gilbert, and again that challenge of trying to work new but also keep your old fan base. That it is difficult when we see kind of, as we were saying, like the adventure genre is kind of unique in this respect. That when we talk about platformers, as long as you have a character running left to right, you have a jump button, that pretty much keeps 99% that audience happy. But it is that challenge, again, of if you try to push into a new direction in any way, not just from an aesthetic standpoint, but from a design standpoint, you're going to have those people like, no, I want like this. No, I want like you did like this before. Why don't you do it just like that? It's the it's very similar to the old, just add multiplayer that people say, just put multiplayer to every one of your games. It's easy.
Can't you just? Yeah, I we talked about this before, and I'm gonna have trouble remembering what we talked about before we went live and what we didn't. But I know that like there is definitely an echo chamber when it comes to adventure game stuff, and even that echo chamber, as small as it is, they're not in agreement about what they want. And and the Ron Gilbert stuff, people are complaining about X, Y, and Z.
Hmm.
It should be this, like say it should look more like Curse, it should look more like Tales, it should look more like, the first two games or whatever. It should look more like the remakes. There's no right way. There's no right answer to that's going to please everybody. And I do know that when you are at this stage of any production, any game, where you are frazzled, you're stressed out, and
Hmm.
you want to get this done, um, and you're very fragile, like emotionally.
Hmm.
Um, that someone coming in, no matter how well intentioned, to say, "Hey, you know what? I don't like this part of the game. I think like you should have done this," or I'm just going to offer some honest criticism and say X, Y, and Z about your game. You know, um, it's not welcome.
Hmm.
Like it's like when you're in that situation, it's like, yeah, thanks. I don't want to hear it,
Hmm.
no matter how well intentioned it is, because I'm frazzled, I'm stressed, and someone comes in and telling me how they would do it better. No, thank you. And I'm not going to say they people can't give their opinion or criticize, but I'm also under no obligation to engage.
Hmm.
And when I saw what was happening with Ron Gilbert, my first thought was like, he's going to shut down comments. That's what I would do. And he did, especially when it's on your own website.
Yeah.
Like, no way. Like, I would never, like, don't come to where I live. No.
Hmm.
And so I felt really bad for him. And I totally understand why he did what he did. I would do the same thing.
Yeah. And the point that I was going to get to, I'll probably just cut the pre-live and live stuff together. So through movie magic, most people will just know by us like referencing it, like some like an adventure game. We're just referencing like a past thing that we talked about. But like we said, like when it comes to like other genres, like as long as you kind of hit the basic marks, what a platformer is, what a first person shooter is, if it's a camera, you have a gun, bad guys, you're gold. But the adventure genre, I think, has had like that unique aspect. There are still people, as you said, the vocal minority, that view it as it must be pixel art. It must, it must be exactly this, this, and this. And I remember from I think one of our first casts, we kind of talked about how the adventure genre really did have that shift from being very puzzle heavy from like the late 90s into the early to mid 2000s to where a lot of more modern adventure game designers like yourself are more, about the storytelling, with the puzzles kind of like second or third. And
Yeah.
it does feel kind of interesting, like that change. Like we haven't seen like too many, pitchforks and torches at the gates for that. But when it comes to like the aesthetics, that still is like one of like those sticking points for a lot of people.
I don't have an answer. And again, I don't want to repeat myself because I don't remember if I said this before or after we went live.
Hmm.
That like I said, the even that small echo chamber of like
Hmm.
really hardcore like Sierra fans or LucasArts fans or whatever. Like even they can't agree on like the right way. I know even when I release a game, I get responses, "Oh, adventure games need to be this, and you're not
Hmm.
doing that, therefore you suck," or whatever. And since there is no right way, there is no right way and there's no, um, even in terms of mass market, there is no right way.
Hmm.
Companies with like, AAA companies with millions of dollars to burn have entire departments to try to figure this out, and they get it wrong. So what hope do I have? I have zero hope of figuring that out. So all I can do is make what I personally like, and then at the end of the project, I can at least say I made myself happy. And fortunately, knock on wood, a lot of other people have liked it as well. So my instincts have been more right than they have been wrong, but I never know. I just never know if what I'm making is going to resonate with people or not. I just know this is what I like. This is what I'm drawn to make. This is, if I have a personal message or thing I
Hmm.
want to tell people, um, this is how I'm going to do that.
Hmm.
And if People don't like it, they're welcome to not like it. Um, and then that's it. That's all I can do. There's nothing more I can do than that.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think in an interesting way, I kind of see parallels to this to the games that are being designed around like super high difficulty. That there are a lot of games, especially from the independent space, that they really push into that minority of you need to be top 10% of the genre to have any chance of winning. And the issue, of course, that you're going to appease that minority. The 10% of people who can play a platformer at like a Kaizo level or
I mean, you say
Grandmaster.
10%, and I don't want to be
Yeah,
misunderstood. Like there's room in the market for all sorts
yeah,
of different kinds of games. Like if you want to make a puzzle heavy game, go ahead. It will still sell. There are people who love those
yeah.
games. It's not like you're dead in the water by making a puzzle game. People love them, and you can provide that for them, and then people will buy them.
Hmm.
People who don't like puzzle games won't, or puzzle heavy games probably won't, or they might not like it so much, and that's fine. The thing about now, about selling and making games now, and you can even look at things like Netflix and streaming. There's no such thing as like mass market anymore. Everything, it used to be, something's on prime time, on a major
Hmm.
network, and that was like what everyone saw. Now that doesn't exist anymore. There's like everything is splintered off into like little niche markets, and they all cater to them. There are so many more people playing games now, more than
Hmm.
there ever was. Games are so more accessible than they ever were, and so you can appeal to like smaller and smaller groups, and it's fine. You could still earn a living and sustain a company that way. It's totally fine.
Hmm.
So it's not to say that if you make a puzzle game, that's wrong. You're dead.
Yeah.
You're not going to sell or whatever. You can really make any kind of game you want.
Hmm.
Within. And not to say that every game will sell well, but there's no reason why, if you want to make a specific kind of game, go ahead.
Yeah. And I think like YouTuber and influencer culture has really, I think, exacerbated that as well. That you will have, a Twitch streamer or a YouTuber who only covers adventure games or only covers war games or grand strategy or whatever, and they will find their people. Just like with any genre, there are you'll be surprised by if you go online for the first time, there's someone else who likes the exact same things or similar things to you. Um,
Mm.
as a very interesting point, I seem to be finding more people in the game industry out of like New Jersey and the East Coast in the past like 3 years than I ever found like in school and in college like 20 years
Mhm.
ago. So they are out there, and as you said, as we've talked about like plenty of times here on Game Wisdom, I mean that if you have that idea that resonates with you, most likely there's going to be people who it will also resonate with.
Yeah.
And as long as you get like the genre, like again, like the bare bones of the genre right, like if you make an adventure game that it's horribly buggy or characters don't move right, it doesn't matter how much you stick to everything else. People are going to be annoyed by that, just like if they're annoyed by a bad platformer or a bad
Hmm.
RPG. But again, it's that issue of, as you said, like you have to give people what they want, but not exactly what they want when it comes to like a release.
I mean, like I said,
Mhm.
my approach to trying to figure out what to make is like throw darts at a wall. An idea just comes, and I think, okay, yeah, I'll try that. And I mean, what's funny about Old Skies is that it started off as a jam game in
Mhm.
2019, and I was playing around with 3D tools. I just thought it would be kind of fun to make a little game with the 3D tools, and I downloaded this system called Uma, which lets you create very quick characters that could walk around and stuff. And they have a bunch of costumes, and I just got a bunch of environments, and I ended up with a woman in this like sci-fi looking suit walking around a modern city. And I joked, oh, maybe she's a time traveler. And then I thought, oh, okay, that's what the story is. It's about a time traveler. And then it just sort of steamrolled from there. You just never know where ideas come from,
Mhm.
and I'm just eternally glad that they do. And it's not so much like I always say. I forget where I heard this. It's not my quote, but I forget where I heard this. There's no such thing as a good or a bad idea. There's just really good and really bad execution of those ideas. You can
Mm-hmm.
have like really think of how many movies and games or television shows or whatever that have this amazing premise, but then it's just executed so badly that it's just
Yeah.
terrible. Or vice versa. You can have things that are very, very basic, but executed so well that it becomes transcendent or whatever.
Yep.
It's all about how you execute the idea.
Definitely. I mean, again, it's that all that like ideas are a dime a dozen. It's all about again, what is that finished product? And if you can get to that point where you have either that most, no one's ever seen it before, or we've seen it before but never at this level of, what it does,
Yeah.
it can, blow open doors wide open for a lot of developers. And I do think we see developers kind of chase that dream of, I'm going to make the platform, or I'm going to make the adventure game, or first person shooter, or whatever. But again, if you're
Too much
executing.
pressure.
Yeah.
When I hear like, oh yeah, you're like whenever I see an adventure game developer saying that like I'm bringing them back, and it's like even I wouldn't say that about myself. It's just like no genre is going to be on one developer's shoulders,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hubristic to think that. I am guilty of thinking that, because like back in the early 2000s, like when I first started, there was this feeling of just by virtue of making a point and click adventure game, you were doing the world a favor.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't matter if it was good, but there were so few of them and they were so dead that just by making one, you deserved brownie points. And I remember thinking that too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, and there was always like when the game came out and if it didn't sell, it was always, oh, look, see, people don't like adventure games. It's like all the entire genre, all the games all adventure games got lumped together into one box.
Mm-hmm.
And even now, like an adventure game, a high profile adventure game comes out and it's a dud and it doesn't sell well, it gets reviewed terribly. And then the discourse becomes, see, adventure games do suck. And then that makes it harder for me to sell my stuff. And it's just the fact that they are kind of lumped together like that has always been an issue. And
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, you're right. There's no other genre that really has that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Even a platformer, or even something like a roguelike, or real-time strategy, or even like shmumps. People still make shmumps. They never, that just never happens to them. But there's just something about adventure games that makes that narrative continue. I don't know what it is, but I think it's also maybe it's cool to be the scrappy underdog. It's cool, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're working in this niche subgenre. That's cool. Um, and I think that's part of it. I think that might be part of it. I don't know.
And I guess for the people watching, join Game Wisdom. You can be part of the cool
Yes.
underground niche following there. Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point. And I think that kind of, like, as you're saying, that mentality of, as long as I make a game in this genre, it will automatically do well. I feel like that was kind of like part of the independent scene from maybe like late 2000s and maybe like early mid 2010s. Like, you put out a platformer or you put out a real time strategy game. It doesn't matter, good, bad, and different. There just weren't a lot of indie games, or the indie scene hadn't really exploded yet. So you had, a pretty good chance that people were going to find you just simply by the fact that, Steam didn't have hundreds of thousands of store pages at that time. But
Yeah.
as we have seen and things have changed, I think people these days expect more from their games. The idea that, hey, you have an adventure game or you have an RPG, great. I
Right.
have 500 more games, or I have several dozen more on my wish list. Why should I check yours out?
That's it. And I was in this discussion with some developers a few days ago, um, and there was a developer who was asking about like how to market his game, and he was having trouble, and some other people were offering advice, and and something was like, "Hey, Dave, why aren't you saying anything? You know about this." And I mean, the thing is, like, I'm very hesitant to offer marketing advice or things like that, or promotion, how to promote your game, because I know a lot about how to like sell and market your game as a brand new developer in 2006. Things were so different back then. And like I had no idea what I was doing then. And I just was lucky, and I managed to figure it out. And like in hindsight, I see what I did. I'm like, oh, like this was actually very smart. But I didn't know that at the time. But now whenever I make a new game or I want to promote something, it's sort of I go into it with the understanding that I have like that foundation already built. That like 16 years of making these games and developing a fan base and all that, that's already there for me to take advantage of. Because I mean, it didn't come from nowhere. It took 16 years to get it. So I just have that going for me. How a new developer markets their stuff in 2022, I don't have the slightest idea. Yep. So I just don't know. It's a completely different animal. And I do know that you're too spoiled for choice. There's just so many things, and there's so many games to try. I mean, like we said, was over, I think, 1,500 demos during Next Fest. And if it's not something you think you might not like, you're probably not going to try it, or try mine anyway. Yeah. So yeah, it's all about finding, like, if you're making a product for like a niche or a certain audience, it's about finding them. But the way I handled it was that there were fewer indie games around, and let alone adventure games. There were just few indie games around in general. And just by making them, I was able to people noticed my stuff because there wasn't a lot around. And so people kind of found me through that. Just by making sure people were aware of my work, people could come to me. And now things are different. Like, how to cut through the noise is a huge challenge, and I don't envy anyone just starting out. But there are plenty of new developers, even new adventure game developers in the last few years, who release something and they outsell everything I've done put together. So it's not like I have a huge advantage over everyone else. It's just, I don't know. Like, again, I don't know. I don't know how I do anything. I've never known what I'm doing. I've never known. I've just been very lucky.
And again, like, as you said, like, that's a point that I could rant on about for the next few hours, in terms of how much marketing has changed in the last 5 years, even the last 2 to 3 years, again with the pandemic hitting, and how that has affected developers. Because a lot of my audience are smaller or even first-time developers, and it's very hard to give marketing advice like that. Because I mean, we can just say, post on Twitter, have a TikTok. Okay, now what do I do? It's
my biggest fear is that TikTok stops becoming a viable place to market, and I'm going to have to or Twitter stops becoming a marketable place, and I'm going to have to figure out how TikTok works. It's just so above my head. I'm like, what, do I start dancing? That seems to be what people do on TikTok.
I don't know either. If you find out, you can tell me that.
Write it down, whatever it was. It blows. I have no idea. It is so over my head.
I guess that's another question. As we're talking about kind of the adventure game market and topics about this, as we were saying earlier about kind of the rise of influencer culture, streamers, YouTubers, and all that. Have you noticed anything in terms of there being a market for people to watch adventure games? Because this is one of those big things that I know I've talked about a lot, in terms of the issue with adventure games is they're oftentimes related to being a book or a movie that you play at one time. You don't necessarily need to play it 5, 10, 15 times. It's not a roguelike, unless someone wants to invent a roguelike adventure game. If anyone out there has an idea, let me know.
I think there was one that was in the works called Star Mazer, and I think it kind of died. I know there was some controversy there. I don't need to get into that, but yeah, I know that someone did attempt it. I don't think they got anywhere with it.
So I guess the question for you is does the adventure genre have a popularity among YouTubers and streamers in terms of showing this off? when I was reviewing what was it, Sucker for Love, kind of like a romantic horror visual novel style game. When I did my review of it, I purposely only used still images because I didn't want to spoil the actual game.
I saw, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't. Here's the thing: I often worried about streamer culture, whether or not, like, if someone is playing, if someone's playing my game on a stream and they complete it, then okay, then that's like all that entire everyone who's watched that stream now got the experience for free,
Mm-hmm.
and they probably won't buy the game. And in a way, that's what led to Unavowed, was like having a lot of like branching and choices
Mm-hmm.
and stuff, and how if there's a good chance if you watch that stream, you might want to see how it played out if you made different choices, so you would buy the game to see. Old Skies is not that game. Adding branching on top of time travel would have broken my brain. But I think the thing about it is like there, it's not so much that, like, how do I explain this? There, like I said, there's so many people playing games now that, like, if a game, the streamers, okay, it's a shame this is live because then you can't edit this to make me sound smart. But the streamers typically want views. They want people to, tune into their channel and, subscribe and send the money or whatever. So they will choose what's popular. It's very rare, especially among the big influencers now, to play some obscure little thing on their channel, especially if they're really, really big. So if a streamer plays something of mine, it's more of a validation that, oh, like, my game is popular enough for this streamer to have chosen it. And so it's more of like it's more of a, like, it's like piracy, like, I think like a game that, like, the heavily pirated games are the ones that are really popular and sell really well. So it's like, okay, that's just the way it is. So I don't worry about that too much. I don't know if that answers your question. Are you talking about, like, do streamers work? Did I answer your question, or did I get it completely wrong?
I think you kind of got to an answer. I guess with the idea.
Story of my life. You got there. Eventually.
And I think, like, we had this period where I think everyone really tried to focus on making their game stream friendly. I won't be the next Five Nights at Freddy's, or I won't be the next PUBG or Fortnite or whatever. And I think developers have kind of moved away from that. I think, like, as you just said, that if your game is big enough, if it's, interesting enough, if people are already talking about it, then, a PewDiePie or a Markiplier, or I don't know streamer culture, so I'm in, like, the old man of as well of, who are these big name streamers like that?
And it's often never one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I still remember when this was like almost a decade ago. Felicia Day had a YouTube channel. I think it was called Geek and Sundry, and she had a show that she called The Vlog. Felicia's vlog or whatever. And one episode, she talked about playing Resonance. And I saw this and I'm like, oh my God, this is it. And I'm freaking out. You know how many sales we got from that? 0. It did not make a dent, didn't do anything. So it's like, what does it mean? It's usually like one influential person's not going to make or break your game. It's cumulative. It's like, a lot of people talking about it all at once gets people interested. And at least that's how it seems. Again, I'm not a marketer. I never studied this. I don't know nothing about it. But it just seems that the more my game is talked about, the better it sells. And it's kind of generating and maintaining that signal. That's always the challenge. That's why I retweet everything. You mention, like, I have a tweet deck of all of my games. If you so much as mention one of my games, I will hit the retweet button because I just want that signal to be constantly perpetuated. And, because generating that signal from nothing is almost impossible. But once it's there, it's like you do everything you can to keep it going.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. And I, again, like, when I do a lot of my developer stuff. I will at every developer when I cover one of their games because that also helps me out as an influencer. So that we have that whole ping pong effect of I retweet you, you retweet me, and we play the social media dance, the
Yeah.
tango there.
Like I've started doing things with the voice actors now, with permission, where since it's all on Zoom and I record it anyway, I make these little, behind the scenes videos of the voiceover sessions, and it's sort of like it shows, it's a little sneak peek of what I'm doing, and shows I could show myself being a good director, and the actor gets some publicity as well, and so we both benefit, with assuming they're comfortable with it. I always ask permission and I show it to them first, but it's just, that's just basically as everyone works. It's no one gets by on their own. No one makes it on their own. That you always need help in some way or form.
Yep. And I guess to go back to old side, there's a quick time check. I know it's about 2:40 our time, so I figure maybe another 30 minutes, give or take, if that works for you.
Sure, that's fine.
All right. To return to old guys in terms of kind of like going with different kinds of adventure game standbys and designs. I know one of the big things that was posted is that this game will also allow your characters to die. Again, being a time travel story, death isn't as punishing as it was back in the King's Quest, Space Quest era. But I guess in terms of like your design process or like how you're structuring Old Skies, does having these, I guess, the quote unquote fail states, does that kind of change or influence how you're structuring the game?
It's okay. The way it might have been a middle, not misleading exactly, but the people were thought like, oh, so I wasn't able to die in the demo. Like in the demo bit, it doesn't happen. But basically, I came up with the idea because I was writing this scene where you need to save. There's this guy who's these not a guy but a couple. This is a Prohibition era, gangster story. They're robbing a jewelry store. And it's important. You need to keep them alive. And in the history, they died during the heist. And so you need to keep them alive. And my original thought was, oh, like you have a newspaper that says like what happened. And so like every time you try to do something, you can like read the article to like see how it changed. I'm like, that's really boring. Like I just couldn't see how that would work. And so I thought, okay, well maybe like maybe you could just like rewind time somehow so you can keep trying different things. But I'm like, then why can't you use that in every other part of the game? So I'm like, okay, time rewinds when you die. It's like a fail-safe of whatever technology you have. If you die, you get rewound like a few minutes into the past and you can try it again. And so that just ended up becoming so much fun because suddenly like what it enabled me to do now is that it ended up becoming a huge gimmick in the game. Like in most of the missions, like you die so many times because it's kind of a way you experiment and you can gain information like each time you die. Like there's this one bit where you have to like you're in this bar and then like this bad guy comes in and ends up like shooting the place up, including you, and you have to like so you rewind and you say, okay, there's like here's the spot on the floor that he stopped in. He stopped here. So then there's here's this billiard ball. You put it right there, and when he walks in, he'll like slip and fall. And it's a little moon logic-y. But the fact that you can like rewind, you're expected to like experiment. The reason why mood logic sucks is because often it's like, well, I never would have expected that to happen. I would never have thought that would happen. That's dumb. But the whole point of this system is that it's going to happen because you've seen it before. You know what's going to happen next. So it can get a little moon logic-y and a little fun with some of the puzzles. Assuming like making sure you die at the end of it. So that's like I have to make sure you die somehow. And it's become like there's certain like little mini sections where like you have to survive by kind of arranging things so you don't die. And it's really fun because like she remembers everything that happened. And so she has this very relaxed attitude to dying, which is kind of funny. It's been a lot of fun to play with that system.
As a kind of a bit of a tangent, but kind of like related, like storytelling wise, time travel is one of those things I hear from a lot of writers and storytellers as like a concept that they hate. That it's one of those Pandora's boxes when it comes to trying to tell a meaningful story or an interesting one. I guess how's it been for you writing a time travel story?
I told you how much trouble I was having, and like, there's this awful trap when writing a time travel story where you want everything to be connected, especially if it's something where you're going like back and forth between different eras or whatever. You're constantly trying to make connections. Oh, this person is this person's ancestor, or like, oh, this is going to mess things up or whatever. You're constantly making these connections, trying to like do that. And as a writer, you get excited by that. You get excited by those possibilities, and it's endless. It's just a rabbit hole you can just fall into. And it can get very complex very quickly. There's a reason why the best time travel stories start off with very clearly defined rules.
Mm-hmm.
Or, like, I've been watching The Time Traveler's Wife. Like, the rules are very absolute, and they stick to them so closely. Or something like Back to the Future, where it's like the story is very intimate. Like, it just centers around this family in this town and nothing else. Like, the stakes are very personal. They're not, like world ending. The stakes are very personal. And so you're able to you won't get overwhelmed by it. And that's what was happening with the first iteration of Old Skies, is that the stakes were too big. And I was trying to do Day of the Tentacle style puzzles amongst 7 different eras of history. And it was too much, way too much. And so now I've loosened up the rules a little bit, but the one rule I set for myself is that you go to an era, you stay in that era, you do what you need to do within that era, and then you leave. And that's it. So there's no real paradox shenanigans or whatever. I mean, except I'm getting a little tongue-tied here. And I realized this as I was designing each mission. If I happen to come up with some clever timey-wimey thing while I'm designing a section, then I'll pursue it. But I'm not going to design each mission with the intent of trying to be clever and timey-wimey and all that stuff. Because then if you're trying to make it clever, it won't be.
Mm-hmm.
But if the cleverness happens organically, then it works. I always use the BBC Sherlock as an example. The first season or so was very clever.
Mm-hmm.
It was everything happened very naturally and organically. But by the 3rd or 4th season, I don't know how many seasons they were, is you could tell they were thinking, okay, this has to be clever, this has to be cool. And it was so enamored of being clever that it stopped being good. At least in a lot of other opinions too. And so I that's a trap that's so easy to fall into. If you're trying to make it clever, it's not gonna be good. But if let the cleverness happen, just write a story, just try to keep it simple. And if something cool happens organically, then pursue it, see what happens. And that's how it's worked for me so far. Just sort of letting clever things happen organically. And if it doesn't happen, so what? It's still a good story.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and the organic part, I think, is a really good point there, because again, as you were saying earlier, that a lot of developers,
and then I wanted water. I don't know.
that a lot of developers often get into that point of chasing the fun, or it has to be this super expansive. It can't just be a platform, or it can't just be an adventure game. We got let's throw in a visual novel, cooking, roguelike, space exploration in, and let's throw this all in there, and somehow it will all turn out well.
But the fun is I'm sorry, finish. I interrupted you.
I'm sorry, but as we've said, as what we've seen, that for a lot of the games that do end up working, it's about finding that one, singular, thought line or wow, my mouth is drying out there, but throughput. Yeah, thank you. That kind of defines the entire experience. And as you said earlier, are you enjoying what you're doing? Like, are you enjoying designing this game? Because if you're hating the design of your game, it's going to be very hard to then say, I hate working on this game for 3 years. Go buy it for $19.99.
No matter, I mean, like, you always end up hating your game anyway. But if you start off hating it, then that you're already like handicapping yourself. Like, you need to be able to fall back on, I at least like this idea. And if you're not enjoying it from the start, then you are in for a world of pain. But you mentioned something about chasing the fun, which is a big part of like how I redesigned this game, because as I was I still remember this moment where, like, if you look at my design notes, you can see the moment where I just decided to, like, where you could just tell this is the moment where Dave said fuck it. He just like let his brain go, because at one point I was like, okay, I want to set a mission in the 1870s. And I'm like, okay, like why would you be bringing someone there? And I had all these ideas. Oh, maybe there's some heirloom or something about our family's history, blah, blah, blah. And then I started researching about 1870s. I read about like the boxing scene. And then I thought, well, I had this silly idea of like a boxer who, was a 3-time world champion, was no one that she could, she would. And so she decided that first it was a he, and then I changed it to a he. How I'm like, well, what if his deal is that, he wants to challenge every single champion boxer to a fight and then become the literal champion of time. And I just smiled and I'm like, that's really fun. And I'm like, all right, let's make this a woman instead. And I just made it a woman. So, and I started off with this idea, like she literally, I even posted this on Twitter. It's like, yes, I'm writing a scene where, a boxer wants to punch Mike Tyson in the face, and I was so enamored of this idea. It was so much fun. And I ended up writing a whole mission around that. And it made me laugh. But then, like, then when I had to really think about it, I'm like, you know what? Like, the story is taking a more serious turn, and her motives are like, it's silly. Like, it is silly. This is silly. And so I did change that motivation. I did change the reason why she went back in time. But chasing the fun, or chasing that serotonin, got me there. It got me to where I needed to be, even though I didn't end up going with that idea. I mean, it's fun, but it's ridiculous. It's a little too ridiculous. I still love the idea, but it got me there. And like basically, whatever gets you there. If it made me smile, like it made me laugh, and I'm like, I like this, And once you settle into that groove, then it becomes fun. Game design is hard enough. If you can make it fun for yourself, then do everything you can to do that.
A question did come in from News System. They ask, do you develop for consoles? I guess, have you ported, or have the Wadjet games been ported to console lately?
2 of them have. Unavowed and Primordia are on the Switch. It's not a quick process. We're going to try to port to launch Old Skies on Switch at the same time. As PC and Windows and Mac and Linux and all that. PlayStation and Xbox, we don't know. You can see I have a dev kit right there collecting dust on our dresser. I haven't actually cracked it open yet, because like that's a little bit beyond me. I use it for testing, but I don't know how. I don't know the first thing about actually like making the thing. The actual engineering aspect of it is kind of just over my head. So I do have a person who's handling it, and we'll get there eventually. So we are working on it.
Do you see yourself like porting anything to Xbox or PlayStation in the future?
Well, like I just said,
maybe
we'd love to. Yeah, the Switch port works fine. But we have it. We'd like to get it to the other stuff as well. It's just, it just takes time. I mean, unfortunately, the Switch, it just takes time. And the fact that the games are so old means that when it does come out, it probably won't sell all that great. So we're going to try to do a simultaneous launch of Old Skies and see how that works. At the very least, we're going to get Switch. We're going to try to get Switch on at launch. We don't know about the others, but we'll try.
All right. And we are about like 10 minutes to 3, so we'll probably wrap things up in the next few minutes. So if anyone does have any questions for Dave about Old Skies, adventure game design, anything, anything at all, Dave will answer them.
Please ask questions. I'm so lonely.
I'm not here right now. This is just a hologram. I guess so. One question I have for you, kind of like more on the game dev or like on the development side or management side, I was just curious about. Um, Regarding voice actors, again, like as an adventure game designer, you certainly hire and you work with a lot of voice actors. And I know for developers watching this, like voice acting is one of those things that can be very scary or very risky for them. The question that I have for you is, like during the development process, like again, with an adventure game being heavily based on on words and setting up the story, how early do you, I guess, start looking at or start bringing voice actors in to like voice your projects?
Usually not until the end.
Okay.
I mean, the Old Skies demo was an exception because I decided hubristically to add voice acting to the demo. But what helped was that I already knew that Sally Beaumont and Edwin Tiong would be playing Thea and Nazo because those two characters were in that jam game that I mentioned, and I always had their voices in mind when I wrote the characters. So I already knew that like they were going to play those roles, so I didn't have to worry about like the casting the major characters. So that helped a lot. Since I know they're going to be in the main game anyway, I know I'm not going to be re-recording it, re-recording those characters. And since it was like a small standalone thing, and all the characters in the demo were not going to be coming back later in the game, then I figured I'll just cast it now, and it'll be fine. But usually I wait until the very end, till pretty much everything is written, because once things are recorded, it's hard to change it. It's hard to edit your lines once it's been voice recorded. So I will usually wait until the very end.
All right. And I guess to return to this like adventure games in general, one thing I want to ask you about, especially with Old Skies, and as we were just saying earlier, with like having like Moon Logic style puzzles, I guess if you had to like try to put your finger on it, like where do you think like Old Skies falls on, I guess, like the puzzle difficulty curve, for people watching?
That's a good question. I've never been good at puzzles. I think because most of my games tend to be more grounded, and it's hard to create puzzles that are both challenging and grounded, because by their very nature, there are things you probably wouldn't be doing in real life. And often the complaint about most of the games I've personally written is that they're too easy, and I'm okay with that. That's just how I roll. With the rewinding puzzles in Old Skies, I think they'll be a little more challenging than something like Unavowed was. Unavowed was not very challenging. There was maybe one puzzle that a lot of people got stuck on, but that was mostly me not signposting it well enough. I hate being stuck in adventure games. If I'm enjoying a story and I'm enjoying like even the interactive aspect of it, walking around, talking to people, looking at things, I'm enjoying that. If a puzzle stops me, I get very frustrated by that. So, and I forget who said this. It was at an IF panel like almost 16 years ago, where someone very smart, who I don't remember who they are, said, if you have to leave my game, like go to Google, to enjoy it, then I have failed. And since Google exists, like getting stuck in a puzzle is optional. So a lot of developers focus on things like immersion and interactivity and all that stuff. And that's what I tend to focus on as well, making the moment-to-moment stuff engaging and fun. But to answer your question, because I went off track as usual, it's harder than Unavowed, easier than Resonance, which isn't saying that's a wide gap. But it's I don't know what the scale would be. I guess if you have like Unavowed, which is like at 1, and then you have something like Resonance or Primordia at 10, those are probably our most challenging games. This would be around like 4. Maybe it's more challenging than other things I've done, but not as challenging as some of the others.
All right. Let's see. Yeah, and the Google solution, I think, as that developer said, like you don't want someone to have to leave the game in order to solve it. I mean, that's something I've been saying for years now. I mean,
Of course,
any
now it's a little easier because I could just whip up my phone and not leave the game.
yeah.
I'm playing Persona 5 at the moment, and then there's these sections when you're in your classroom and the teacher asks you a trivia question, and you have to answer it. And I'm like, oh crap! Oh wait, I have my phone right here. I'll just look up the answer, and bam! I'm still in the game. I don't have to actually leave it. So I guess that's different now too. But I still but of course, because I whip out my phone and I'm looking at it, I can get distracted by things on my phone. You don't want someone to go leave your game and get distracted by other things. You want them to stay. I want you to stay with me. I want you to stay in my game.
All right. Regarding Old Skies, I guess anything we didn't touch on, design wise, storytelling wise, anything that you would like to mention to people watching live or recorded.
Uh, I can't really think of anything. I mean, I guess there's nothing really I can think of except that I'm enjoying making it. It's a different. People keep asking if it's like Unavowed, and I'm like, it's a completely different animal than Unavowed. I don't feel comfortable comparing the two. And I admit, like the burden of expectations after Unavowed did so well was like a thing that sometimes causes me problems. But yeah, there's nothing else. I really hope people like it. I'm enjoying making it, so I'm hoping people like it.
All right. I'm trying to think if there's anything else last minute to ask you. I guess one thing about
no
old
questions from the crowd.
now, but I'm sure when this goes up in recorded form, we'll get a lot of people who missed it live who will probably be throwing questions at you. So we'll hopefully for the recorded folks, thanks for watching there. But one thing that I wanted to touch on, as you said with Old Skies, it's being built around kind of like that episodic, or like each adventure or each case is its own self-contained kind of situation. I guess does have I know when we were talking way back with Blackwell that you had that same kind of approach that was going to be designed around a chunk that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Does I guess from like a development standpoint, how does that affect as you're coming up with a game that you're breaking it up into these individual segments as opposed to say this is a 8 to 10 hour adventure game, everything is connected, everything
Very good question.
Item over there you got in 20 minutes will be used 7.5 hours in the future.
I recently gave a half-hour talk about this, so I'm going to try to keep it brief. It was a godsend because I think actually because I realized without when I was having trouble with the Old Skies 1.0, that was the problem. I was trying to make one huge big thing, and because it would take so long to make that one big thing, I wasn't getting that regular dopamine hit of that I did with Blackwell, or even Unavowed, where it was a mission-based structure. Where once I finished one mission, and that was like this, flood of satisfaction. I wouldn't be getting that if it was one big 10-hour game where everything was connected. And getting that dopamine hit is kind of what keeps me going. And so by modularizing it, by making it smaller chapters in a bigger story, really helped with that, because now it's if I just get to this bit, then it's I'll have a whole section I can get testers looking at it, and they'll have a whole thing they can critique and give feedback on, and just it's this wonderful self-perpetuating positive feedback loop, and it's really helped a lot. And the one thing that I decided that the priority needs to be on the individual missions, and there is a kind of overarching story arc that connects them all. But it was sort of in the back of my head, kind of percolating as I worked on these individual modules. And that was the case with every other game I've ever done. Unavowed, same thing. There is this very solid through line throughout all the missions that connects them. I did not know what that was when I was like until I was like halfway through production. All the Blackwells, same thing. I sort of figured it out as I went. Each of the individual missions took priority. Because if those aren't fun, it doesn't matter what the big story arc is. And I figure even if I have my idea of what the story arc is, but if it doesn't work out, then at least I have then the game will just be several self-contained individual missions, and that's fine. Then those will still be fun and people will still enjoy them. So it's helped a lot because like even if like maybe like if the glue holding it together is a little weak, so what? Like the individual stories are good, and so I'm focusing on making those as good as possible. And like the story arc involves kind of like, well, I don't want to spoil it, so I won't go into it. It's a bit esoteric. It's more of a personal journey than like here is stuff that happens. So I'm finding it very fun, and it's yeah. So I basically it was a godsend to answer your question.
And I think, like, as a interesting point, we definitely don't have the time to get into this too much right now. But I think that's kind of one of the main.
I still have time. If you're worried about me having to go, I have like a half hour, so
okay.
I can stick around if you want. I can talk I could talk forever if you let me.
But I guess like it kind of is, I think, an interesting parallel. And when we talk about kind of the older adventure games, again, we're talking late '80s into the early 2000s. They were very much that huge sense of scale. It's not just you have an individual mission. It's, we're going to give you 8 hours of exploration with each area compounded on the next area and compounded. And I think, like, from your games with Wadjet and what we've seen from other adventure game designers over, like, the past, like, maybe, like, 5 to 10 years, it has been that kind of focusing more on the compartmentalizing and the module design that I think has kind of, in a way, I think it has subtly shifted like what we've seen from adventure game designers over the past 10 years.
Yeah, I mean I think it's excuse me, even in those older games where it's like one big thing, a lot of them were curated. I had like the early King's Quest where it's like, yeah, it was one big thing. It was just like you have to walk around and kind of figure out the puzzle chains. But as time went on, it was often a little more directed. Like, yeah, okay, you might have this whole big world to explore, but you have your specific task. You know what you need to do. The early Telltale games were often like that. Here's a big place. Kind of shrunk down because often like you had like episodic stories, and you have like one where it's like, okay, here's what you need to do, and then you kind of explore that game world to do this one thing. But it was significantly shorter. And I kind of prefer that myself, especially as an adult with limited time, where it's tighter, more focused. It's a little sacrilegious, where I prefer the Telltale Sam and Max to the LucasArts original. I'm waiting. I can see the pitchforks from here, because that game was sprawling. And their shtick kind of wore a little thin after a while, but with the Telltale games, they were short and focused, and they didn't wear out their welcome. And I really did. I enjoyed that a lot. I preferred that, and I think that's what a lot of developers are doing now. It's like more, we want you to enjoy our games. We want you to enjoy them, and so if you're just wandering around and not knowing what to do, and you're not enjoying it. You're not having fun. So we have to, we often make sure to be like, okay, trying to be subtle about it, but like, okay, here's where the fun is. If you're looking for the fun, then we've failed.
And again, it's about getting that dopamine hit, that motivation to keep going.
Yeah.
And I think that we kind of maybe have answered a new systems question, but just to clarify.
Get there eventually.
How do you design the game to make sure there's always progression on the gameplay without getting stale?
That's a good question. I guess the episodic thing helps. Because often, especially with Unavowed, it was, I didn't make the game with this in mind. I read a review later where they described the perfect gameplay loop, and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess that was smart. I didn't realize when I was doing it, how it's like, you're in headquarters, you talk to your friends, they talk about, they have their opinions on how the last mission went. then you go out on your next mission, you make the choices that you make, and then when that's over, you come back, and then you get to do that again. And it's like, yeah, you want to finish so you can hear what your companions have to say about what you just did, and then you go to a new place and you do it again, and it's I wasn't, that was kind of very unintentionally being smart. But things like that, there's never a right way to do it. With Old Skies, I think what's working is that each mission is in a different era. And I think that kind of, once you get tired of one area, you're probably near the end of it anyway, and then you go to a new one. And it's interesting because like you get a whole new art style. The 1870s is a lot different than like the 1920s, especially in New York. You have like the Art Deco buildings and the cool cars, and the flamboyant outfits versus the 1870s where things are more like a lot more gray. There's a lot more run down dirt roads. Very different visually, and that's exciting. And I remember working on on Unavowed. And the last mission I designed was Chinatown. And by that point, I was getting a little not tired of the game, but thinking, like originally it was going to be in Queens. And I thought, just another, area with big buildings. And I just decided to set it in Chinatown because visually it was very different from the rest of the game. And it made me feel, even though you can play the missions in any order, as a designer, like it made it fresh and new for me. So that's also something I do, just to sort of, try not to make it all samey, if you can. The episodic modular style helps because you can make each one different.
All right, I think I have just one more question because again, if I'm not careful, I'll take you to like 5-6 o'clock. Like it's nothing.
I don't
mind. One thing that I wanted to ask you about, and this is something that I've seen from a lot of indie developers, and just as you were talking again about, Next Fest and, respecting the player's time, I want to talk about onboarding for a few minutes, because this is something that I think is, or like getting the player into the game, getting them acclimated to the mechanics, the story, that kind of thing. Now, I think this is one aspect when it comes to the adventure genre that I don't think we've seen a lot of evolution in this respect in terms of how do we kind of get off to the races? How do we get the player who maybe hasn't played an adventure game, or maybe they haven't played, your particular, again, you're in air quotes, for any developer watching. And again, like, as we've talked about with how much, the evolution of genres, the evolution of design and game dev, I just want to get your thoughts on when it comes to kind of like getting someone into this game. Like, have you like your own sensibilities change at all? Or, like, what are your thoughts on, somebody loads up my game, how do I get them excited about it?
That's always a challenge. I think like I succeeded with Unavowed. Rooftop lightning being thrown at you, it was pretty intense. With other, I remember, I don't often talk about my experience working on Emerald City Confidential, but it did teach me one thing. Because back in the day, you buy a game, you sort of took it for granted that the player would, at least play it for a little while. Because you bought it, you spent money on it, you have this investment in it, and it might have this slow start, but you kind of took it for granted that they would play it. And if you spent $50, $60 or however much on a game, you're gonna try to get your money's worth. But when we did Emerald City Confidential, it was under the system where it was a 2-hour demo, where the first 2 hours you could play any game for free for 2 hours, and then you had to buy it. And so they were very concerned with those first 2 hours. And it's like you need to like grab their attention, especially for those first 2 hours. And when I first made that game, you had some vague direction of what you needed to do. There were all these locations, and you just sort of explored. It was very much a slow burn opening, and they didn't like that for the reasons I mentioned. And I was a little huffy about that. I'm like, oh, come on, like you expect people to explore it and everything. But as I get older and have less time, if a game isn't grabbing me, then yeah, I'm like, oh God, like I have other things to do. Like, and I have this huge collection of games I haven't played yet. I get that. It's annoying as a developer, but I do get it. I guess it's like you trying to establish a bit of mystery, like at the beginning. I think in the Old Skies demo doesn't start where the game actually begins. It actually starts. It's something like, Fia's talking. She's like chatting someone up at a bar, and the guy just disappears. He just gets paradoxed out of existence, and she's like, "Oh well, this happens to me all the time." And then she takes a drink and walks out. And it's just like, and the testers who played that are like, "Oh, that's interesting. Like, what's up with that?" And that's then it goes to the scene where the demo starts. And I think it's just establishing that, like, that little bit of something that where you make the player go, "Oh, what is that? Like, I want to know more." Like, I just something goes a long way in just establishing that initial investment of, you invest in this, and now you want to see it. You want to see a return on that investment. You have to convince them to invest their time, and that's always a challenge.
Yep. And and like getting the player, that little, nugget or that little breadcrumb to let them follow and get into the game. I think again that is enormously difficult, especially for a lot of new developers, because I've played a lot of games from like first timers and students, and like the first 10 to 20 minutes it's either all exposition that really doesn't matter. It may just be, all tutorial that's like very slow. And I think, as we've said, like, people don't have a lot of times these days, and it's hard to
the
say.
rule is, like, if you're throwing in like crazy terms and explanations, like, limit it to 2. That's it. That's all. That's all the brain can handle. When they first started up, there was this wonderful extra credits video, kind of examining the opening scene of Skyrim. It's like within the first minute they talk about Sovngarde, and like they mention all of these terms that if you play the game but if you don't, you're like, you're not going to understand any of it. It doesn't make any sense. And that's that. And also, one thing I always try to do, make it visually interesting. Especially for the last few Blackwell games, I'm always made sure that the opening scene was something very evocative. I think, like, Convergence, Deception, you were like on a boat, and you got all blurry there. Yeah, you're on a boat, and you're like, "Oh, what's there? What's going on?" And I think Epiphany, you're like in the snow outside of a tenement building, and it's very visually interesting. Just something to make you, say, hey, the next, at the very least, the next few minutes are going to be interesting. So you're going to want to stick around. And, once you get that, once you manage to get that, then, they'll stick around, theoretically. Like I said, I don't know what I'm doing. So take all this with a grain of salt. This is not gospel.
All right. Let's see. Anything else? Just like trying to think there's anything else on my list. Well, my voice is dying as well.
I am out of water.
Yeah, me too. I'm out of my drinks too. I guess from a logistics standpoint, for people watching, do you have any idea or an estimated date for when Old Skies is coming out?
When it's done is my firm release date. I'm estimating, because right now I'm focused on this other game I'm publishing, which, again, it's so agonizing I can't talk about it yet. But I'm focused on that. I'm editing all the voiceover for that, and another year at the very minimum, which it kills me, because, like, I want it to be out sooner, but games just take a long time. And also, I lost about a year and a half on the original design of Old Skies, so this is the longest I've ever gone between personal releases, and it's killing me, because it's just like, this is the longest I've ever gone without people, responding to my work, which is why doing Steam Next Fest was so gratifying.
All right. So I guess with that, if you have any social media sites, places, anything to plug, do a TikTok dance.
I don't know what that. Wipe It Down. That's the only one I remember, and that's from like 2 years ago, isn't it? Wadjet Games is my Twitter. I have a Discord that's linked on my Twitter profile bio. Anything else? I have an Instagram, which I never use. It's just Wadjet. That's about it. I'm not very good at this.
All right. Well, Dave, I will let you go for today. I'll let you get enjoy your vacation next
Thank
week.
you. I'm looking forward to it.
So, for everyone watching,
If anyone is at Develop in Brighton, look me up. I'll be there.
all right. So, for everyone watching this live or recorded, thanks for tuning in. For my social media, do all the liking, subscribing, commenting. You'll find links and stuff down below and up on the overlay. If you are a developer working on an upcoming game, whether it is adventure game related or anything related, and like to come on and talk about it, please get in touch. Other than that, Dave, as always, has been a pleasure hanging out with you this Friday afternoon where it may or may not be raining. It's like the mystery of my weather just keeps changing. Like, I'm just watching my weather alert here.
My window faces New Jersey-ward, and I can see clouds in that direction. Where I am, it's nice. So I guess they're on their way. I don't know.
No, sounds great, I guess. But, Dave, as always, if you are free in the future, it'll be always great to catch up.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. So for everyone watching, thanks again for tuning in. Come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. And until our next chat, take care.